There. So I've entitled this discussion as From Text to Print, Preparing Articles for Publication. My initial way of drafting this was on the idea that you're drafting a paper for a journal article. But then again, I kind of thought about it and realized that maybe, just maybe, you would also want to do some preparation for an edited volume. I think, although the problem here is that our university is more oriented towards journal publication with high impact factor, I still think, as an anthropologist, I still think that books are equally relevant. We call it romantically as slow academic. Slow academic because you took a lot of time writing the book, a lot of time producing it, and somehow it brings you back to that classical notion of what an academic is, which is publication of books and such. So anyway, that being said, this presentation is a bit more geared towards the article production. Let me start with how do you start with your article. It is very important from the onset that you identify which journal article you will be publishing in. So I know that for most of you, the style is to write the paper and hopefully find a journal. I think it's counterproductive when you do that because every journal has its own identity. Every journal has its own policy that you will have to eventually reconfigure your entire paper to fit that journal. So the first thing that you will have to do when you have a paper that you would like to get published is write with that in mind. Write with a framework that I am writing this for this specific journal, and then from there you know how to tailor fit your article. So for example, if you will submit a paper to our humble journal, the Journal of Social Health, if you don't have our identity in mind, you will mistakenly submit to us an all medical type of article that does not even attempt to relate to society. So the moment the editor reads that, immediately it gets rejected. It gets rejected because it does not fit the journal. That's the primary consideration of every journal. Does this paper fit our agenda? You have to understand that, and I know that most of you already know this, but just to highlight it, you must understand that knowledge production is political. Okay, when I say political, we're not talking about politicians, all right? When I say that knowledge production is political, it means that it is governed by the ideals and visions of a select people who are gatekeepers of knowledge. So the gatekeepers of knowledge in this context would be the journal articles, right? And the editors that are behind these journal articles. So when they say that our journal would like to, and this is, where do you see these things? Where do you know how to play with the journals? You immediately see this in the mission and vision section of the journal. So every journal has that section in their webpage or whatnot. They have a mission and vision or something like an about of the journal. You will see from the get-go what kind of papers they are interested in. So if they say that, let me just use our journal for example. If they say that this journal would like to provide a platform or an avenue for a discussion between the intersection of society, politics, and health, you should know at that very moment that the paper that you have to submit to this journal should have those variables articulated well. Because if you miss out on those variables, your paper will not be accepted. So determine the journal that you would want to have your paper published. Look into how they look. My style usually is look into the recent publications the journal has. So I check what types of papers they're publishing, how they are framing the titles, how they frame the abstract, and I kind of format my own abstract and title from those types of from the recent publications they've had. So that's the primary task that you have to do. Select the journal, understand the journal, and then create your article from that, from what you've learned from that journal. So the rest of this that you can see are, I've cited here all the sources, so you can just easily read this again. I feel actually when I'm preparing this presentation, I felt like I'm just going to really discuss the points that the authors made for your reference, and then add my own experiences as an editor of books and journals. So so these are some of the key points that we have to establish at the onset of this discussion. Okay, next. So what are the common problems that we see among in manuscripts that immediately makes us turn or just return it and say that, sorry, we are rejecting your paper? The abstract itself is very powerful. If you have a poorly made abstract, it's hard to get the attention of the editor. So you see, when you submit a paper, the first thing that the editor or the reviewer, actually it's the editor that gets to it first. The first thing that the editor sees would be your abstract. If your abstract is messy, it's done for. It's done for. It's done for in the sense that the editor will not even attempt to send it to the reviewer. So the abstract is your foot in the door kind of metaphor, if you think about it. So what do you do with your abstract? You have to make sure that your abstract, number one, follows the pattern of the journal. Number two, that your abstract is concise and clear. So I've noticed that in some cases, authors would attempt to use a lot of highfalutin words in their abstracts, which is interesting if you're in a literary organization, maybe. But for editors, when you try to do that, the first question that pops in our head is this readable for a greater audience? Because if not, no, it's not gonna go. So remember that most editors are also concerned with readership. So if your abstract is not interesting enough, it's not packaged for a wider audience reach, it would be quite challenging for it to even pass through the layer of editor to reviewer. So that's one. Be very careful about copy editing issues, because if your abstract already contains grammatical issues, that would send a signal, a red flag to the editor that the paper will have a lot of them. Because if you cannot tame your 250 abstract with good grammar, that would signal to us that the paper will be a riot of words. So the abstract in itself should convey to the editor that my topic is highly relevant, it's highly aligned to your journal, and I have something new to add to this discussion. So those are the three important parts of your abstract. All the others are just, variables to consider, but the three main part of the abstract that would guarantee publication would be your alignment to the journal, right? And then, are you relevant? Are you interesting? And are you going to contribute to the discourse? If you're relevant and interesting, if you follow the journal, but you don't have any new contribution, what's the point of publishing you? Right? So there always should be this novelty of an idea that you will add to the discourse, whether it is to chop down a powerful theory that you think does not work anymore, or it is probably a support of the theory through localization of an idea. Because the thing is, it's hard to always find something that will bring down another theory. So what you could do instead is to create a localized framework. I've noticed that in recent publications, this is something that is gaining currency. Like if you say that this research would look into a localization of the framework of scientist X, and the contribution would be, whatever. So localization uh, of a um, of a formidable theory would be a powerful, convincing factor for a lot of editors. Okay, so there, let me move on. So I'm not going to go through all of this because it's too much, but one article that is cited for this presentation have collected what editors and reviewers thought were the most common issues of submitted manuscripts. And I'd like to just highlight some parts here. First one, right here, the importance of the topic. So again, I've mentioned this just a few moments ago. I've mentioned that the importance of the topic is a deal breaker for all types of submission. That is the reason why, if you've noticed, almost every single paper right now has some kind of a COVID relation, right? So because these are the highly saleable types of article that the moment you attach a study with a COVID framework or a disaster framework, it immediately gets that kind of a flag that says this is important. So an attention is being given to it. I've seen papers that went as far as correlating COVID to what? Well, there's COVID in tourism, COVID in education, COVID in this. So especially in the field of medicine, wherein you are engaged in this topic, I think you'll have high chances of publication, definitely in terms of importance of topic. So for example, I think one of good paper to look into right now would be how how online learning is affecting the quality of education of your students in the medical program, or how transitioning into a face-to-face is affecting the quality of learning of the students. So those kinds of things are definitely going to be worth reading if I'm the editor or the reviewer, because it's quite important, it's relevant. Now, the study design. The study design is, you would see all of the issues that they have here. This is more related to quantitative research, but I'd like to highlight that, or maybe this is my bias, Dr. Kalimag is very much aware of this. I'd like to highlight that qualitative research is gaining currency in a lot of health researches. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, quantitative research is still very much in demand because you want generalizability, right? But then again, qualitative research is getting currency right now because of the intricacies of the narratives of people that are being shared. Plus, I have to highlight as well that it doesn't mean that you're doing qualitative research that numbers will not be crunched. Because due to various softwares right now, like the one that I'm using, MaxQDA, I can transform conversations and the codes that I've created from those conversations into numerical data that could be used for whatever purposes they could serve. This is something that I've experienced having worked in consultancy jobs with ADV and WHO, wherein we would have like questionnaires, text-based answers, and then we will transform it into numbers, percentages, and such that would be useful for policymaking and would be easily understandable for others who are not into qualitative research. So the study design could be a novel idea that could get your paper published. Remember that a poor design would immediately be seen by the editor, or if you get past the editor, the reviewer. So another one is the overall presentation of the study and the findings. Now, this is where it gets a bit tricky. Every person has a different way of writing. If you read some of my works, I've experimented in multiple ways of presenting data. So in our field, in qualitative research, there is a presentation of data wherein you're just narrating what the data was all about. Recently, and I found that this is something that is also gaining some following. Recently, I've been dubbing on a conversation type of presentation. Like I would write my take of the data. I would insert what is the take of. I would write the let's say neutral academic version of the data. I would insert the analysis of the person, of himself or herself, and then I would insert my own take of it. It's more like three persons conversing in the manuscript. They are in different text font, and that was highly appreciated in several international organizations that got to read my paper and got to publish those papers. They were interested in the variation in font. It's like a conversation happening within the paper. So that's something that you could explore in qualitative research. I don't know in quantitative if that is even possible, but because of the highly scientific nature that is required in quantitative studies. But overall presentation of the study matters. If I have my very creative way of presenting text, there are also better ways of presenting your graphs. And in one of the reading materials that I've attached to this presentation, there are discourses on what kind of graphs. Should you do graphs? Should you do tables? Should you do figures? What should you do in your presentation of data in a quantitative medical study? There. And then, of course, the interpretation of the findings. For the interpretation of the findings, a critical flaw that I always see on papers is that they interpret their data in a vacuum. Like in a vacuum in a sense that they do not even attempt to relate it to the ongoing discourse in the field. So for example, you've discussed that, okay, this is the findings in the Philippine scenario, whatever. You never go to the extent of saying, so this has an impact on the theory of whoever that person was, and because of whatever reason. I'm hoping that I'm coming through to you, but what I'm trying to say here is that the interpretation of the findings is crucial in terms of cementing your reach in that field through your paper. It is here wherein your capacity as a critical researcher is measured. Are you going to just talk about yourself, or are you going to have a discussion with the intellectual community? Because if you're just going to talk about yourself in your interpretations and finding, it doesn't do much. Okay, as opposed to you're going to say, so my findings are this, and in connection to findings of person A, B, C, D, we do not agree because of, and then this is where theory comes in. This is where a critical approach to knowledge production comes in. And this is where your paper gets highly cited, which is another point that we have to consider in publication, right? It's actually such a I've been thinking about this recently. It's so exhausting to be an academic. You're not only required to publish, because before that's the only thing that matters, right? That you get published. Now your merit as an academic is on your citation index. Like if your citation index is low, then you must not be a good quality of an academic because people are not citing your works. So there are, of course, tricks to how people can cite your work. Make sure that your tags, I'm sorry, I'm going ahead of myself here, but make sure that your paper has keywords on the abstract that are easily relatable to any discourse available in town. And then, of course, you have to also be a bit critical of other scholars because that's how you gain traction. Again, as I've been saying earlier, if your interpretation of findings is confined to yourself and your study, you will have less citation. Why? There is no critical discussion going on. How do I put it in a more colloquial way? In interpretation of findings, if you attempt to discourse with other scholars, it's like you're gaining a chismis moment. You know, you're creating this chismis moment na may nagbasa and then somebody would say, oh, but you know, this other researcher kind of criticized him. And that's going to be intriguing. So another person would read your paper. If that person disagrees with your disagreement, then you get cited. Whether it's bad or good, you get cited. So interpretation of findings will definitely cement the number of citation that you will have for your study. All right, so let me move forward. Sorry. Okay, let me move forward. So these are from the author of this article cited here. These are the top 10 most frequent reasons why manuscripts are not published or rejected in these fields. One is on medical education, the other one is on respiratory care. Notice that it's consistent. Picking the wrong journal is definitely there. Some of you are seasoned researchers already, and I feel uncomfortable even giving this lecture to some of you. But just a reminder that when you get rejected, when your paper gets rejected, it doesn't mean that you're not a good scholar. Sometimes you just did not really hit the vision of the journal, and that is why I think something that I appreciate as a person submitting to journals and as an editor, this is something that I've been very keen about, that when we reject papers, it's important that you assure the author that the paper is being rejected because it doesn't fit the journal's vision. Because otherwise, the author would go haywire on interpreting what the heck was wrong with my paper. They would self-doubt and such. I'm saying this as a person who promotes mental health, so maybe I'm being overly sensitive about those things, but I think it's very important because I've seen how this has, rejection of journals have clouded the idea of some, budding researchers on their worth as researchers. Some even quit being researchers because they got rejected, not realizing that they're good researchers, they just picked the wrong journal. So there, I will not go through all of this again because they're quite a long list. But if you're doing medical education like Dr. Irvi, who's a very prolific author here, if you're doing medical education researches, these are the commonalities of what editors and reviewers have mentioned as the reasons why they reject your paper. You can check on your own right now if you are within this. I think as an author, one of my common mistake is that of I think it's overinterpretation of results. So why? it's a hazard of my field. So in anthropology, we are more inclined to look into every single detail, like the way people said it, the way words are put together, to the point sometimes that it becomes, it leads to some kind of over interpretation. But in this context, overinterpretation of result is like squeezing every single last drop of what you can interpret from your data set, which is, again, in my field of anthropology, would be a totally acceptable thing to do. But of course, in your field may not be the best option. So in respiratory care, I don't know, what is a common thing that you feel like you're doing here? I'm forgetting this is a webinar, right? So I cannot ask people to talk to me. So, okay. I think one common thing that I've noticed in some of the papers that were submitted to me is that they get carried away during the discussion. Like they totally forget they had objectives. That level of carried away. So remember that when you write your discussion, you're there not to repeat your results. Okay, that's something you have to remember, and I'm going to go into the detail of this in a while. You're not supposed to repeat the results. You're supposed to have a conversation with greater literature, right? So what happened is that in some contexts, in the discussion part, they forget that they're supposed to answer the hypothesis. They forgot that they're supposed to answer the objectives of the study. They forgot all about that. They just went on and on discussing how they're making sense of the results without proper reference to the objectives of the study. So what I try to do when I'm writing is that, so I put my objectives, on somewhere where I can see it all the time. So in my case, so the Word document, right? I put it on the, what do you call those things? Header. So I put my objectives on the header so that every time I type, I see my objective, so that I know I'm supposed to be answering this and this alone for this particular discussion. Moving away from those objectives would make my paper a mess. Why? Because you're not supposed to be discussing other things other than your discussion points. All right. So, hang on, I overclicked. So for what are the important? So I said that I will be trying to discuss about how do you turn your text into an article for publication. So let's go to this point by point. So remember that in articles, you have to do IMRAD, right? Introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So here, I'm going to have some discussion of those IMRAD, so that we could tailor fit our papers to that kind of format. So again, depending on the journal that you are targeting. Please have that in mind throughout this entire discussion. So what are the important components of your introduction section? Number one is that there should be a general background of the condition that you are discussing. Okay, to do this, you have to say what is known so far about my topic. So as early as your introduction, you should be already discussing, number one, what is going on with this topic. Like who are the people talking about this topic? What are they saying? Where do I come in this study, in this kind of discussion? So that is how you create your introduction. So for me, what I typically do is that I start with this is a formula that I usually use. I start with current events. And for some of you, you may say, oh, but that's not, that's not your preference. It's fine. But for me, it allows me to create a good backdrop for my study. So I will, for example, if I'm writing about, I'm writing about COVID and intimacy right now using the platform of Tinder. So how would I locate that? So I'm writing it in the context that Okay, so COVID and level forms of intimacy in the Philippines. So I would talk about forms of intimacy first, documented forms of intimacy, online intimacy first in the Philippines. And then I would insert COVID scenario. Okay, and then after that, I'll try to insert some current discussions on this, meaning published articles on this, if there are. If there are none, then I would locate like I don't know, if there's none, then that's sad. I would attempt to use like but I haven't tried that, but maybe I would use I don't know, news articles and such, but not really. But anyway, locate your study. What is going on with your study? Okay, I'm sorry, no, not with your study, with your topic. And then after that, you have to discuss the unknown aspects to this topic. Like for me, for the Tinder study that I'm doing, what is unknown right now is how is the pandemic affecting face-to-face meeting. I don't want to use the term, but maybe this is what you can relate to. But how is this affecting the hookup culture in the Philippines? Like prior to pandemic, hookup culture is definitely around. But now that we have a pandemic, how does that happen? Do you also do your hookups online? So this is something that is not yet documented or very minimally documented in in our context. So there is where I would apply this part of describing the unknown aspects relevant to the study. And then of course you set, after you say that, you've already set the tone for your paper. You've already said, this is what's happening about this topic. These are the people who are talking about this topic, but these are the gaps in this conversation. And so this is where I come in. So there you go, the primary and secondary questions that will be answered by your study. This is where I come in. And of course, your introduction should occupy just about 10 to 15% of your manuscript. Okay, next. Next is your second part is the materials and methods section. Here, the IMRAD, right? You're on the M already of the IMRAD. So here you're supposed to be discussing the study design and the setting. So the time period is definitely important to be discussed here. Who are the participants of your study? How did you select them? The inclusion and exclusion criteria. It's also important to cite here whether your paper was approved by an ethics board. I've noticed that in a lot of researches, but maybe not in your case, but in a lot of researches right now, I've noticed that some people don't even get ethics approval. They just keep on publishing and publishing without ethics approval. So that is quite a very problematic context. Excuse me. Sorry, I've been speaking since 7 a.m. So okay, so I think it's quite problematic that we don't have ethics procedures or even a discussion of ethics protocol in your paper. So because it kind of makes me wonder how you've treated the participants of your study. So ethics approval should be there, just probably a one-liner. Informed consent, a discussion about informed consent should be there. The protocol of the study, like how was the study implemented? How was the data collection implemented? The sample size, how did you calculate that? And of course, the method of data analysis. Now, I was just having a lecture about this just before I met you guys. I was just telling my students that writing the method section is a relaxing part for me, because unlike writing the introduction and the other parts of a paper, the method section is like a template already. You already have choices here. You just have to write it. For example, are you explanatory or exploratory? What kind of method are you using? Are you qualitative, mixed, quantitative? You already have choices. You only have to select them and write about them. So it's quite what do you call this, straightforward. So it's easy to write the method section. So let's move on now to the results. For the results, the guidepost that you have to work with when you write the results is that it is in the section that you will present the data that you've collected and nothing more. You're not supposed to make a commentary on the results. That should be done on the discussion section. Okay? Here, you're just presenting your results, hence results. So the sample size with details of exclusion should be discussed here. Basic characteristics, So the main results, you could use tables, figures, but I highly suggest that this is quite discretionary, right? So some people prefer using tables. Some people prefer using figures. Sorry, am I time? Sorry. No. Okay. So when you decide to choose a figure, this is attracting readers that are more inclined to visuals. Okay. When you present tables, it's less appealing to people. So again, that's kind of a trick that you play. So are you attempting to have more readers? Because if yes, then that's one way of getting to that. So that's one of the arguments that people have. Some people are saying that they don't like using figures in their papers because they're distracting. Especially if they're colored, they're distracting. So they'd rather that tables are there because they're straightforward. So it really depends on your motivation and depends on the kind of author that you are. Okay, again, when you present your table, you are not supposed to present your interpretation of the tables. Like, of course, you're supposed to say something about the table, right? But you're not supposed to make those interpretations that you would use in a discussion. So for example, you present a table and you say, so this table says that, variable A is whatever to variable B. But you end your discussion there. You're not supposed to say, and this means that in terms of age is a determining factor. No, you put that in the discussion section of your paper. So the secondary results should be given separately. What are secondary results? So these are post hoc analysis. What do we mean by that? These are your second layer of analysis of the results. Okay, and of course, everything should be written in past tense. Okay, how about the discussion? Okay, I have two I forgot to put their citation. Anyway, it's in the reference section of this presentation. I put here side by side two guidelines from two different authors. Okay, so for table 4, this is your discussion section. We're already with the IMRAD. We're on the D. So here, you have to have like a short summary of findings. Short. By short, I'm talking about 1, maximum 2 paragraphs. Okay, you're not supposed to repeat what you've said in the results. You're supposed to have a summary of the findings, summary of the results in 1 to 2 paragraphs. And then here, you're going to ensure that the results answer the main study question. Dito na po yun. You have to start answering your thesis objectives. You have to start answering your research objectives here. So kung a research objective mo says that this study would like answers the question of, I don't know, how does food security affect, how does household dynamics affect food security? Then here is where you're supposed to answer that. How? So from the results, the preceding results, there was a connection from your data there. There was a connection of, I don't know, A, B, and C to D. So here is where you tie them up. You say that from the preceding results, then you discuss them and make your answer clear. So this is where you answer your questions. This is where you answer your hypothesis as well. So in your discussion section, so again, we're discussing how the results could be understood, right? You also need to locate here your results in the broader discussion of this topic. So here, compare the results with other studies. So you're going to say, so let's say it was found out that I don't know, gender within the household affects food security. This was also found in the study of Kalimag in 2020 on blah, 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 blah. However, Visconde refuted this in 20, whatever, and saying blah, blah, blah. So here you're having like a discussion. Hence, it's called the discussion, because you are discussing with other scholars about the topic with reference to the results of your study. So it must be an active discussion. So this is also where somehow you're going to show the strengths and limitations of your study. By showing the results of other studies, you're going to say that, for example, Kalimag mentioned of this factor in. However, this study was not included. This factor was not included in the study. So you are letting the audience know that yes, there is this possibility, but that was not covered by this study. So that's part of the discussion. And of course, the implications to, in your case, clinical practice, in my case, the field that I'm working in. So you have to understand that your introduction and your discussion create some kind of an hourglass. I'll show that in a while. Now, let me move to this other section. These are some of the common questions that you should be mindful of when you write your discussion. How do these results relate to the original question and objectives? Notice that's the same point that I was discussing just about this part. Do the data support your hypothesis? Oh, sorry. Are your results consistent with others, with what other investigators have reported? Again, parallel, right? Discuss the weaknesses and discrepancies. Parallel. Is there any other way to interpret your result? What further research would be necessary? And explain. You have to explain all this without exaggerating. Two authors, different timeline, the same context of how to write a discussion. Okay. So this is the hourglass of a structured paper that the author was mentioning. And again, I put in it side by side with what another author is mentioning about how long should your paper be. So this is actually, I think, my last slide. So the background of, you would notice that your introduction perfectly aligns with your discussion, right? So notice that your aim should mirror the first part of your paper, which is the main results. The areas of uncertainty, right? The areas of uncertainty should mirror the comparison with other literature, right? And known facts, strengths and limitation, background, implication. So it kind of, if you think about it, if you fold it, they answer each other. That's how you should write your introduction vis-a-vis the discussion. Now, look at the length, right? That's a concern all the time. How long should a paper be? So your paper should be about 25 to 40 pages. It depends on the journal, right? mostly it's a word count. In some journals, which are quite questionable, in some journals, articles as as short as 3,000 words are accepted as articles. In some other journals, there's a requirement that your article should be about 7,000 to 8,000 pages. It depends. Again, we go back to the first thing that I've ever said: what the journal wants from you. The citation, what the journal wants from you. So these are some of the key points that. So there are suggested page numbers here. Should you be interested to follow it. All right, I think that should do for my presentation for today. I hope that I was able to contribute something for your writing processes. Good morning.